Welcome to Facebook Live with Jeanne Ives. This is just a live take on my real story with Jeanne Ives. Wanted to cover just a few things that occurred over the weekend. Maybe there's some stories that you missed. I think that they were important. But before I begin, I just want to make a couple personal notes. First, I found out today that my Uncle Joe died. Uncle Joe was a Vietnam vet, Purple Heart veteran. He was 84 years old. He also served with the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he never married, and so I am the recipient of all of his military memorabilia. And so I opened that up today and just posted some pictures of it on Facebook. I think it's important to remember the people who served, especially during one of the most difficult times in our history. You know, Vietnam was not an easy war for anybody to fight. He was drafted. I found his actual selective service announcement, his document from 1961 where they drafted him into the Army. Definitely a different time period. I'm very proud of my uncle. He was Special Forces officer, so he did intelligence work in Vietnam. Again, he was a Purple Heart veteran, so he was wounded in combat. He had a Bronze Star with Valor. You know, he's really quite the guy, and it's really just sad that that whole generation is passing by us. You know, and we could learn a lot from them. I think they had selfless service to our nation, something that we still find in many cases. We find it in our police officers, our firefighters, our other public safety people. We find it still in the military, but increasingly we find it's fewer and fewer people who participate in that, and yet they do us all a great honor by serving with distinction, and he certainly did. Super proud of my Uncle Joe, and sorry that he's gone now, but I'm happy that I was able to visit him in August. Just happened to be in the area. He actually lives in Iowa and died in Iowa, and so I'm glad that, you know, whenever I get back there I could stop by and see him. So I'm glad I had that last time to do that. I also was back in South Dakota last week to defend my own property rights. So my other uncle, who also served in Vietnam on my mother's side of the family, Uncle Joe's on my father's side, my Uncle Dan served in Vietnam, and he was a farmer right outside the town that I grew up in. My siblings and I, we all worked on his farm during the summers. And he passed away about 2 years ago, and he deeded his land to some of, we have a little chunk of land that he deeded as us, and we were going to develop riverfront lots along a mile-long stretch of the Missouri River. His property abuts the Missouri River. This is land that was handed down from my grandfather to him to farm. He protected it. He protected the riverfront. He kept all the nice mature trees up, all the underbrush up, because he knew eventually he wanted to develop those lots so that his heirs could have it for riverfront property. And so his widow has decided to basically build that out. And I went to South Dakota to defend my property rights in this case because the environmentalists wanted to tell us what we could do with our private property. See, they didn't want any development along the Missouri River, which is ridiculous. And it was interesting because the National Park Service actually testified in this hearing. It was an appeal to the planning and zoning's decision that gave us the authorization to actually develop the property in this very modest way. We're talking 2.5 acre lots, lots of frontage, all the trees would be preserved. The alternative would literally be to farm up to the river's edge, taking out all of that natural growth, all of those mature trees, farm to the river's edge, and, you know, put up a hog shed. We could do that without any problems, but for some reason having a beautiful home set way off from the property was a problem to the environmentalists. I mean, go figure. But regardless, we did win that appeal, which is great. But during that testimony, the National Park Service came in and basically said, you know, we're willing to buy this land. And I was like, you know what? My uncle would be turning in his grave if we sold that land to the government, I assure you. And I looked back at them and said, we will never sell this land to the government. Private property rights mean something in this country. If you are not free in your economic pursuits, you are not free at all. And people need to remember that. So I'll give you a bigger update on this in a little bit. I'll actually have my sister come in and we'll have a full discussion on this, because I think people need to be reminded about how important it is and how fundamental it is to American principles that we secure our private property for the future. So I wanted to just basically tag you on those two items. Then I wanted to talk about just a couple other things that caught my eye. I posted these on Facebook, and probably was my personal Facebook page. You can look at them there. But the first one that caught my eye was Democrat priorities. Again, they had this huge article about Pritzker's priority of spending nearly $200 million on building out electrical vehicle charging stations around the state. That is his priority, electrical vehicle charging stations, when the average person in this state cannot afford an electric vehicle. They cannot afford. They're out of reach for nearly every American, as are even most new cars now. Cars are selling for $10,000 over the list price. That's how hard it is to find a new automobile. The used automobile department is not much better, and yet you think that people are going to be able to buy these $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 electrical vehicles. There's no way. No, regardless, Pritzker's priority is to build out electrical vehicle charging stations, and so were the Democrats' priorities, and unfortunately 11 Republicans who voted for that CJA bill, which we'll be talking about endlessly until we get that repealed. But that's his priority. But I want you guys to think, every time you hear infrastructure, I want you to remember this. In Chicago, there are over 400,000 lead service pipes that go to homes in Chicago. 400,000. They estimate it's going to take over $8 billion to actually replace these lead service pipes, and they estimate it's going to take them 50 years to do it. Now remember, lead service pipes were outlawed. They were considered illegal back in the late 1980s. And these people have still not replaced their lead service pipes. I am betting that if you're in the suburbs, most of you don't deal with lead service pipes. In Chicago, they've known about this problem for 30 plus years, and they have not done anything about it. They still think they have 50 years. It's going to take them 50 years to replace all these. It's outrageous. So when Pritzker talks about infrastructure, when these unions talk about infrastructure projects, when they talk about it, you need to remember that the biggest priority would be safe drinking water, and they are ignoring it, completely ignoring it for electrical vehicle charging stations. Where are their priorities? Where are they? It's for their green energy fantasies. That's where their priority is, not where it really matters, which is safe drinking water. So, you know what? If we end up with like the Flint, Michigan issue, or this blows up to a huge national issue, don't blame me, because I've been talking about it now for 3 or 4 years. So be warned about that. Another thing about infrastructure, I found this, well, this is actually more about electrical vehicles. It was kind of interesting that the West Virginia coal miners rescued a couple who was stranded with their broken down electrical vehicle. I don't know if you saw this. I saw it in the New York Post. They had this article. A group of West Virginia coal miners rescued a couple after their electric vehicle died, pushing the car to a charging station at the coal mine. I just can't make it up. And then, of course, you probably heard that Governor Newsom from California went on the air and literally asked Californians to reduce their energy load after 4 p.m. for the next 2 days, because otherwise they're going to be experiencing blackouts. They said, we want you to turn your thermometer up to 78 or higher and refrain from using any large appliances. This is California that has now said that you can't put natural gas into your homes, so you can't pipe that and you have to go all electric. That has said that they're going to outlaw gasoline vehicles. I mean, these guys are crazy towns. So they want everybody to be all electric, and yet they don't have electricity to supply the grid, even as it stands now, without the increased load of everybody having an electric vehicle. It's insanity, absolute insanity in California, but Illinois is just as bad. I mean, these people outlawed fossil fuels too. They said no more gas, no more coal. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's crazy town with these Democrats. You got to get rid of them. Okay, on to one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is schools. Wall Street Journal also had a really good article on schools are back and confronting severe learning losses. This was written by Scott Calvert. It was posted yesterday, September 6th. And it discussed, that just the return to school, that people are hurting in math class because their reading comprehension is so behind. In one case, they talk about this girl named Delaney, and essentially, and her mother's. I'll just read the top of it. It says, Delaney Tidwell says she loves reading. The tricky part for her is understanding the words on the page. I would read one sentence over and over again, said the 9-year-old fourth grader. Though she returned to school in August of 2020, repeated quarantines left her mostly on her own at home. Her father is a construction supervisor who has to be on site. Her mother works from home but gets few breaks during the day. Delaney sometimes had to care for her little sister. Her difficulty with comprehension is also hurting her in math class, where she struggles to understand word problems, said her mother. So it talks about the pandemic era learning setbacks resulting mostly from a lack of in-person classes. They're struggling to combat learning losses and measure how deep it is. There's two problems here. How deep is that learning loss, and how do you combat it? National data show that children who were learning to read earlier in the pandemic have the lowest reading proficiency rates in about 20 years. The U.S. Department of Education last Thursday released data showing that from 2020 to 2022, average reading scores for 9-year-olds slid 5 points to 215 out of a possible 500, the sharpest decline since 1990. Average math scores fell 7 points to 234, the first statistically significant decline in math scores since the long-term trend assessments began in 1970. Anyway, learning losses generally are worse in districts that kept classes remote longer. Well, of course. I mean, obviously, right? But so anyway, how are you going to make up ground? Well, apparently there are billions of dollars in federal pandemic relief aid was headed for education. That is going to run out quickly. But what's interesting is that not much of that money is being spent on what could probably really help, and that is tutoring, direct tutoring of the students. I wanted to bring this article up because I think it's something that you should bring up with your own individual school districts. How did you actually spend your COVID money? Tell me precisely how you spent your COVID money. Because I know some of them, we're going to upgrade our heating system. We're going to upgrade our air filtration systems. Well, fine, probably that would help also with colds and flus. But honestly, what are you doing about learning losses? How much time are you going to spend on task, making sure that those kids catch up? It does say here, a study released in 2011 by the Annie E. Casey Foundation found that 16% of students who don't read proficiently in third grade fail to graduate from high school on time, a rate 4 times that of proficient readers. So being proficient in reading is key. Are they really looking at reading scores? Are they really looking at bringing up, especially those in the youngest grades, so that they can understand more difficult concepts? Let's see. Okay, here's another interesting line from it. Districts might apply solutions and discover their inadequacy only after the federal aid is spent. The biggest pandemic relief program, the American Rescue Plan, earmarked $122 billion for K through 12 public schools and required that at least 20% go towards addressing learning loss. In many districts, this is from the Wall Street Journal article, Scott Calvert says, in many districts, it should be close to 100% in Professor Kane's view. So according to the COVID relief money spent, only 20% had to go to addressing learning losses. And I think that that's a pretty open-ended thing. How are they addressing the learning losses? What are they doing with all of that? That is where you need to go. Okay, so back with you. We had a little bit of a mic problem there. I wanted to get back with you. So we were talking about learning losses and how is your district actually handling that issue, and how are they using their COVID relief money? Continuing to reading from this very informative Wall Street Journal article, they say that state level test results show reading scores still largely below pre-pandemic levels. In Indiana, the legislature last year approved a $150 million grant program for organizations such as the United Way that are offering in-person programs with extended learning time. Get a load of this though. I cannot believe this. This is an awesome idea. Indiana also offers families up to $1,000 to enroll in private tutoring. The program, largely bankrolled by federal aid, targets students who qualify for free or reduced cost lunches and who are below proficiency in English language arts and math in the 3rd or 4th grade. That is a great idea. Why won't our school districts do the same thing? They don't have to follow what the state says. Our school districts could say, here's your money, hire a tutor, send us the bill, we'll pay it. Why don't they do that? I'll tell you what, my daughter had a tutor. When they went to in-person learning, we're getting her a tutor. We had her a tutor the whole time. She had a tutor, and I honestly think that's the primary way that she, finished as well as she did in school, because it was a disaster. Anyway, I think that's a really strong initiative. I don't think you'll see it in this state because they like to hoard the money. They think they can do it better. Don't want to go to the private sector. Don't want to have anybody compete or show us up or anything like that. Is that their attitude? Honestly, I wouldn't doubt it, but maybe you should demand it. Hey, I had to get a tutor for my daughter. Where's my reimbursement for all of that? She was worth every penny, by the way. My tutor was awesome, worth every penny. A key part to learn loss recovery effort in Texas is a measure passed by the legislature in 2021 that provides 30 hours of tutoring for students on the subject matter of each test where they failed to meet grade level. So Texas is doing it too, providing this tutoring. And Illinois sits here and just basically lets the public sector unions, especially the teacher unions, run the damn state. Well, this is, parents have got to wake up. So one of the things that I did recently was, because it kind of made me angry, I went to my school board meeting last week, and you probably saw the Alicia O'Connell podcast I did. It was about the genderqueer book, pornographic genderqueer book. A lot of people spoke up about that. But the other part of that is that by focusing on this, they're not really focusing on all the wokeness that's going on in our schools. And in fact, there's even more stuff I've just found out today that is posted in some of our schools and books. It's nonsense. We're going to tackle that issue. The culture matters. Honestly, the culture does matter. But these test scores matter. So I actually ended up doing a printout of just every single school in my school districts. There's 20 schools in the school district that I'm in. And I posted their English language arts % of proficiency and their math % of proficiency. And I think it's really important to note, the school board meets at Hubbell Middle School in Wheaton. It's the newest school in the district other than the preschool that just got built a year or two ago. Hubbell Middle School, $58 million middle school, like over the top. This thing is just like unreal, in my opinion. Its occupancy, it's not even at full capacity. And if it's at 70% capacity, I'd be surprised. But anyway, in that school district where they meet, where the school board meets, I want to know if the school members know the proficiency level of the kids in that school district, because I think if they did, maybe the conversations around the table would be a little bit different, because it never seems to be about academic excellence, about bringing everybody up to standards. Because in that school, Hubbell Middle School, only 40% of the kids are at proficiency level in English language arts, and only 23% of the kids are at proficiency level in math. 23% of the kids. 4 kids walk in, only 1 kid walks out proficient in math. That's pathetic. That's what that is. And so I put these scores together. You can do it for your own school district. Go to the Illinois State Board of Education website, isb.net. Click on the Illinois report card. In the search bar, type in your school district's name, district number, or you can search by city, and you can do the same thing. You can find out the proficiency levels, not just of your school district, but down to the individual school. And there was a big disparity. I mean, Longfellow Elementary School, 65% of the kids read and do math at grade level. That's the highest percentages in the district. But, there's some that are just really slipping. Overall, the district's only at about 42% proficiency in English language arts and 43% in math. So that's nothing to write home about, and that's really needs to be the focus. This is kind of the reason I put this out. It's because it's to raise awareness. Because if it's like this in Wheaton, I assure you it's like this or worse in other school districts. Statewide, only 25% of the kids read or do math at grade level. You guys should know that by heart if you've been following me at all. But anyway, this is what's important actually, is making sure these kids can read and write and are able to take things on to the next level. Hubble Middle School is named for Edwin Hubble. He was a famous astronomer. The Hubble telescope is named after him. He didn't create it, but it's named after him because he's the first one to sort of realize that there are other galaxies outside of our galaxy. He was one of the first to discover that. Make it more definitive. I mean, people had speculated that, but he made it, he basically put his marker on the fact that there are additional galaxies outside of ours. So he's a super smart guy, math, science, all of that. I think he'd be appalled that his namesake school is performing this poorly for its children. So anyway, just wanted to come into this Facebook Live, give you a little bit of sense of what I saw going on. Again, anytime you hear the word infrastructure, realize that sorry, going back to that topic because I forgot one more thing because this is what's important. So when I told you that Chicago has 400,000 lead pipes, true. Am I saying that it's everybody else's taxpayers' problem to do it? No, I'm not. It's a city problem. They have a $15 billion budget. They've never addressed taking care of their own lead pipes. When I was on Wheaton City Council, we knew we had to do something with our pipes, so we put a program in place to replace our piping, our water pipes. We knew we had to do it. We put a program in place to do it, and over time we tackled it. Okay, because why? Because councils previous to the one I sat on had sort of neglected it. Some of those pipes were 60 years old. They had to be replaced. This is a city of Chicago problem. Don't get me wrong. It really is. But they receive federal infrastructure dollars. And when they're receiving state and federal infrastructure dollars, they need to prioritize it and spend it on this. Now, I don't know if you heard about this, but Jackson, Mississippi found themselves flooded out, completely flooded out, because what? They've been under Democrat control for over 30 years. That's as far back as I could find it, but I honestly think it goes back 100 years. I didn't quite trust that source completely. It was Wikipedia, so I'm like, I don't really trust that source completely, but I think it's actually over 100 years of complete Democrat control in Jackson, Mississippi, and their entire water system broke down. They're on a boil water order. The people were without order. There are people doing like GoFundMe sites to bring water down, or bring your water to this site. We'll bring bottled water down to Jackson, Mississippi. This is a man-made crisis that was completely preventable, except they don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't have the right engineers in place. They didn't hire the right contractors. They didn't make sure that the work was done to specifications. It is a S show down there. Wall Street Journal wrote a really, really good editorial on this. The water woes of Jackson, Mississippi explained. And they say the Mississippi City is another example of failed local government. Just like Chicago, failed local government on replacing lead pipes. Mississippi is the same way. I am not saying that we as taxpayers should pay for this. I'm saying that if they're going to get money that's in a pool for infrastructure, they better be spending it right. Neither one of these places are doing. And I just got to read the front part of this Wall Street Journal opinion piece. I think it was really spot on. It's inevitable these days that any urban calamity immediately becomes a progressive parable of systemic racism and anti-government ideology, as one columnist put it. That's been the media spin after last week's failure of a water treatment plant in Jackson, Mississippi. But the truth isn't that simple. This is another local government failure of the kind that is becoming all too common in America's cities. Mississippi Governor Tace Reeves said Monday that we have returned water pressure to the city, but Jackson residents suffer a week without a reliable water supply after flooding of the Pearl River overwhelmed the 30-year-old O.B. Curtis water treatment plant. Much of the blame belongs to chronic mismanagement by elected officials in the city of about 150,000, which is also the state capital. Ensuring safe and reliable drinking water is fundamentally a local responsibility under the U.S. federalist system, with the state and federal government providing some oversight. But many cities like Jackson are struggling to perform this core government responsibility. Jackson's water woes aren't new. In 2014, 90% of the city voters approved a 1 percentage point increase in the sales tax, in part to fund water and sewer repairs. In the past 9 years, the city has allocated nearly $490 million from its capital budget to water and sewers, about $3,200 per resident, but much of the money hasn't been well spent, and the city's water problems have worsened. It's not a matter of money. It's not a matter of resources. It's a matter of oversight by people who don't know what they're doing. Even the state made available $170 million in loans and grants, blah, blah, blah. The EPA came in and issued an administrative order in 2020 saying that the conditions present an imminent and substantial endangerment to the persons served by the water system, and that the city failed to perform even filter maintenance, on and on and on. They say Jackson's competence problems read like those of Detroit and Flint, Michigan. State receiverships help fix their chronic fiscal mismanagement problems, and this is an idea worth considering for Jackson. So, I mean, this is the problem. You got to, it doesn't matter what level of government you're going to put people in charge. You have to make sure that you know who you're electing is competent and actually cares. That's the first criteria. Do they actually care to get the right result for the people that they serve? Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for listening to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives.